Sorry about the technical difficulties yesterday. Had no idea that I sounded like a robot. So, working off the same subject matter of yesterday, but I still think it's an important one. I've been somewhat critical of college football coaches who have either retired or moved to the NFL and have been either unafraid to say or have flat out said that they don't like the direction of college football. They don't appreciate the new transfer portal NIL rules, and I think the entire thing is ridiculous. Like, oh, it's just so difficult to be a millionaire college football coach right now. The kids want money. It's ridiculous. It's stupid. And there has been this kind of constant cloud of people saying, oh, if this keeps up, there's going to be a lot of real good football coaches that are going to leave the profession and go to the NFL or go work in TV or whatever, because they just can't stand the way college football is operating right now. It's the antithesis of everything that they preach and coach. Is like, it's against instant gratification. The hard way is the right way, etc. And now that it's hard, I don't want to be a college football coach no more. It's ridiculous. But I will say, if Jaden Rashada suing Billy Napier goes through, I think that is a legitimate way and a legitimate reason for coaches to say, you know what, to hell with that. I'm out on this. I'm going to the NFL or whatever the case may be, because that's opening up a can of worms that I don't know that you can ever close. And it is a kind of a sad state of affairs in college football when you can say that the current Georgia quarterback who transferred from Arizona State, who was once committed to Miami, is suing the Florida coach because he didn't end up going to the Gators. That is a ridiculous sentence to think about and ponder over the course of like 18 months. This all went down. But Jaden Rashada, if you are unfamiliar, had a $13 million NIL offer from Florida that he originally had committed to the Gators. Well, originally he committed to Miami, but he committed to Florida with this $13 million NIL bag, and then it fell through, and he ended up having to go to Arizona State, which he's transferred now to Georgia. The entire situation is, I feel like, preposterous. One, and maybe it's just ignorance or inexperience, but like, if I'm the parent of a college football recruit, and Jaden Rashada wasn't even like the top quarterback recruit or anything like that. If some university comes and is sitting in my living room and tells me that they've got $13 million for my son, I got questions. Because that sounds like a Looney Tunes number. $13 million? Like, Joe Burrow just started making more than $13 million a year, but my redshirt freshman son quarterback at a middling currently SEC school is going to make $13 million. I would have some reservations and questions, because it just doesn't sound like that's all in the up and up. But for all of that to go south and go poorly and negatively, for it to come back around and lead to a lawsuit where the head coach is one of the people being sued, I think is sort of in the same vein as, you remember, it's been probably like 20, 15 years where damn near every doctor stopped delivering babies because their insurance premiums just got so ridiculously high that they were like, I can't afford the risk to deliver babies anymore because I could get sued for malpractice, and it's going to end up just ruining my career, both professionally and personally. My personal finances are affected by this, so I'm not going to do it anymore. I think you could see something similar like that should Jaden Rashada's lawsuit against Billy Napier be successful. I would have no problem with if Billy Napier got sued, lost because an NIL deal that he didn't really have a whole lot to do with went through. That I would never sit here and be like, no, it's just so hard to be a millionaire. Like, I couldn't do that. I just could not sit here in good conscience and say, like, somebody who lost money personally because something that happened in their professional life that they didn't really have a whole lot to do with went sour. I could see that leading to coaches saying, you know what, like, I can't lose money personally because of something that happened professionally. And I don't know who's going to offer like college football coach insurance money. Like, hey, we'll give you an NIL protection policy. Feels like a ridiculous spot to be in. So I don't, in this instance, if that does lead to some coach or a bevy of coaches deciding, you know, like, hey, you know what, I'm not gonna be held personally liable for some NIL gone wrong situation when it was outside of my control with a collective, and that you're gonna say I failed promises. I think the entire situation is somewhat messed up, because for Jaden Rashada to claim that he was defrauded out of the money is essentially him saying that Florida and Billy Napier knowingly got him to agree to some NIL deals that they were never going to follow through with themselves. I think that would be somewhat hard to prove, because in the early stages of NIL, to set the precedent of like, hey, we're going to be the school that screws you over, is not necessarily going to be a real smart move career-wise, reputation-wise. So I just have a hard time believing that Florida would operate in such a manner, and Billy Napier would operate in such a manner. But then also, like, you got to have some pretty concrete documentation. You can feel as if Florida screwed you over, and I would have no qualms with Jaden Rashada being like, those guys screwed me, because you were promised $13 million, and instead you're the backup at Arizona State. Now you're going to be the backup at Georgia. You're probably never going to get on the field with the Bulldogs, and you thought you had a dozen million bucks coming your way, and instead you get nothing. I imagine that he feels scorned, and I can sympathize and empathize with him feeling scorned. But to then go to court and sue, you got to have some proof that these guys did that. And I would think that beyond a reasonable doubt that there's not proof that these guys purposely and knowingly screwed you over. It just feels like that's a real weird spot to be in, where like, okay, wait a second, this college football program is like, I don't even know what the motivation would be to stockpile you away from somebody else, but they're going to promise you $13 million to stockpile. It just doesn't make any sense. But at the same time, again, if I'm the parent of Jaden Rashada, am I letting my son launch a lawsuit if I don't have some like concrete numbers or concrete evidence that this happened? So I don't know what's going to happen. All I know is that coaches being sued by potential recruits for NIL deals gone wrong feels like a step that could legitimately lead to somebody saying, like, this just isn't worth it for me anymore. The risk is no longer worth the reward. I cannot, in good conscience, sit idly by and open myself up to potential litigation because I wanted to recruit a kid and then decided against it, or we had a deal in place and then we walked back on it. That sounds reasonable to me. But the idea of like, oh, all these kids want today is money. Well, I'm $1 million football coach. It's ridiculous. But that one feels real. Where if it's like, okay, or the head with Mike Norvell's just like, to hell with getting sued and being found like I got to pay some kid out of my own pocket because an NIL deal went wrong. And then like, do you have to negotiate deals and new contracts for coaches where like, hey, if I get sued by a player, the university has to be on the hook to pay my damages? Like, it just opens up all these different boxes. It's like none of it is good. And on top of the fact that Jaden Rashada apparently went to Kirby Smart and said like, hey, just so you know, I'm going to sue an opposing coach in our conference, and for Kirby Smart to be like, hell yeah, sounds good, brother. He gave his blessing. It just, the entire thing, there's always been this shady, seedy, slimy underbelly of college sports that we've had to not really confront and deal with outside of, you know, like Eric Dickerson getting a gold Trans Am from a school he didn't go to. But what are they going to do? Call the cops? There's always, it's always existed. But now that it's kind of out in the open, it is slightly, it's a bad taste that leaves in your mouth. But I think it's a legitimate gripe for coaches who have complained and moaned about the NIL and transfer portal era, that this one is legit. This one, I think you have every reason in the world to say like, hey, wait a second, this sucks. I hate it, and I'm not going to put up with it any longer. That one, I think, is fair. I'm going to watch and see what happens. I would highly doubt that this goes to trial, right? Like I would not believe for a second that this ends up being in front of a judge and shown on court TV. I just don't think that it's ever going to get to that stage. But at the same time, I don't see Florida just saying, hey, we'll cut you a check for a couple $100,000 to go away, because in today's NIL world, everybody's scrimping, saving, and being frugal and pinching every penny they can to extend their dollar as far as they can. So saying, hey, I'll give you $300,000 to shut your yapper just doesn't feel like all that realistic either. But a can has been opened. I hope it's not successful. Like I hope Jaden Rashada, I feel for Jaden Rashada, because he truly honestly believes that he was due $13 million and doesn't have a whole lot to show for it. But at the same time, I hope college football coaches aren't getting sued from NIL deals run amok. It doesn't sit right with me. And I hope we don't get to that point, because it would be a real bad spot for the sport to be in. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you are watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content that we're pumping out here. If you are listening on a podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. Goes a long way in helping out the channel. I'll see you tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Huddle.